The Labour faithful have gathered for their annual conference in Liverpool at a critical point for Sir Keir Starmer's premiership. After a rocky 15 months in power, the party is trailing well behind Reform UK in the Westminster opinion polls, and the leader's personal ratings have fallen off a cliff. The Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham has been at the centre of speculation that he'll mount a leadership bid, but he's now dialed that down, saying he can't run as he's not an MP. The Prime Minister will address delegates tomorrow. Today, his under-pressure Chancellor took to the stage. She defended her handling of the economy and insisted she won't take risks with the public finances.
In the months ahead, we will face further tests, with the choices to come made all the harder by harsh global headwinds and the long-term damage done to our country, which is becoming ever clearer. Our first year in power was about fixing the foundations. Our second must be about building a renewed economy for a renewed Britain. A renewed economy that works for working people and rewards their contribution. A renewed economy where we reject austerity and support our public services. A renewed economy that supports investment, that gets inflation and borrowing down, and where we build growth in every part of Britain. I will make my choices at that budget. They will be choices to take our country forward.
STV's Westminster correspondent Paris Gourtsoyannis is at the conference and spoke to us this evening. Paris, what did you make of the Chancellor's speech today?
Well, I was struck by just how positive the tone was in the face of tough economic realities on tax, on the cost of living and on jobs. In fact, the Chancellor was probably the most upbeat speech that we heard, and the crowd loved it. I think Rachel Reeves has been stung by the criticism that actually her gloominess and the tough talk on the public finances is what helped put Labour in the position that it's in. And that left the role of bad cop to the Home Secretary, the new Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, who announced a series of measures to crack down on immigration and take the fight to reform.
She had to point out, I noticed at the end, that she was going to be a tough Home Secretary, a tough Labour Home Secretary. Does this feel like a conference of a party under pressure, though?
I do think there's a sense of defensiveness and that people don't really know how to get out of that position. The Prime Minister clearly feels that one way is to set up this clash of values with reform. Andy Burnham clearly thinks that the problem is within the party leadership, and he's made himself a lightning rod for people who feel the same way. It is too early for a leadership challenge, but he has been saying things that at least a chunk of the party are thinking.
And the Holyrood elections just round the corner. Has Scotland featured much?
Well, there's been a lot of talk of this £10 billion warship deal with Norway, which will bring jobs to the Clyde. The Prime Minister is clearly very personally proud of that and the commitment it shows to Scotland. But, the UK government and the Prime Minister are not very popular north of the border. They know it, and they also think the fight is with reform. So the detail of how to turn things around in Scotland falls to people like the Scottish Secretary, Douglas Alexander, who I caught up with earlier. Secretary of State, there's an odd atmosphere at this Labour Party conference because you won a big majority last year, but currently in the polls you're trailing across the UK and in Scotland. So give us your diagnosis. What's gone wrong?
I think there's a mood of determination at the conference. You heard that from the Chancellor Rachel Reeves this morning, who said, are we satisfied? No. Do we want to go further and faster? Yes. But on the other hand, we've already beginning to rack up some significant achievements. We saw last week in Scotland £292 million committed by the Scotland Office for the regeneration of communities. That came just after a £10 billion order on the Clyde, £340 million into Rosyth. So we're just getting started.
But there are clearly issues because, as I say, you're trailing reform across the UK, trailing the SNP in Scotland. So what is it that isn't getting through to the public?
Well, frankly, polls give you a snapshot when you need to see the whole movie. I understand people are impatient for change, and they voted for change when in record numbers they delivered 37 Scottish Labour MPs in July of 2024. But on the other hand, we are getting on with the work now. Frankly, no government, however well-intentioned, however capable, could undo the damage of 14 years in just 14 months. So in that sense, we have a quiet and resolute determination to focus on the job in hand, rebuilding our economy and delivering money for public services.
One name that we're hearing a lot of at this conference is Andy Burnham. He says Labour is in peril at next year's elections, including in Scotland. Scotland. Is he right?
Listen, Andy's a friend of mine. I served in the cabinet with Andy Burnham. He was a special advisor back when I was newly elected in 1997. So listen, it's for Andy to set out his thinking in relation to whatever, frankly, he wants to. But we're getting on with the job as a Labour government, and I think most people watching this programme in Scotland want a Labour Party focused on the country rather than talking to itself.
Is he an asset to the party? Anna Sarwar thinks a lot of his ideas, how he's running Manchester.
Is Andy an asset to the party? Oh,
yes.
Ask people in Manchester and compare the quality of services being delivered by a Labour mayor with the horror show that we've seen in Scotland. 1 in 6 of us on waiting lists, 100,000 of us on waiting lists for more than 1 year. Educational standards falling, not rising. So if you're asking me, do I believe that the Labour-led mayoralties in England are doing a better job for the local communities than we're seeing from the Scottish Government under the SNP? 100%.
But he should stay in that job.
Well, he's given a commitment to Manchester. I expect that he will be discharging that responsibility. But frankly, in Manchester, we've already seen the benefits of having a Labour mayor.
Now, we've just heard from the Chancellor, as you said a moment ago. Do you think people are feeling better off as a result of having a Labour government at Westminster?
Well, there's a difference often between how people feel and what a spreadsheet says. So if
because inflation is still rising, unemployment is rising.
Let me finish the sentence. If you look at those spreadsheets, it would tell you we're the fastest growing economy in the G7 in the first half of this year. We've seen 5 interest rate cuts. But if you're saying to me, do people suddenly, after 14 months, feel better off after 2 lost decades of austerity? I totally get it, and I understand people are impatient for even more improvements. But what Rachel, I think, did very convincingly today was to say we laid the foundations in the first year. We've given a pay rise, for example, to 200,000 of the poorest paid Scots by raising the minimum wage. We've given a big new set of employment rights to people, the largest upgrade of employment rights in a generation. So we're laying the foundation, but there's a lot more to do.
I want to ask you about a couple of new policies that have been announced in the past few days. You were in Parliament the last time ID cards were a topic. It was hugely damaging to Tony Blair's government. What makes you think that people want digital ID cards now?
My sense is the debate has moved on a great deal in the last 20 years. If you look at what people now hold on their phones, whether it's train tickets, whether it's concert tickets, frankly, the expectation that you live more of your life online has definitely grown over the last 20 years.
But where was this in your manifesto? This wasn't in your manifesto, was it?
At the same time, if you look at countries like Australia or Estonia, or indeed some of the Nordic countries, I think there are lessons that we can and that we should learn.
But you accept no one voted for this because it wasn't in your manifesto?
Well, in terms of why we are looking at this now, there are particular challenges that we are facing in relation to illegal working in the country, and I think it's right and reasonable that in the face of those challenges, the government can actually develop policy to answer those challenges.
And another policy announced in the past few days, Scotland's birth rate is very low. There are rural communities crying out for the lifeblood of legal migration. Why does your government want to make it harder for people to legally come to the UK and work and stay in the UK?
Well, if you look, for example, at the proportion of people who have come to the UK who are choosing to make their home in Scotland, I think it is revealing that that number is significantly lower than in other parts of the United Kingdom.
But you want to make it harder for them to come to the UK?
So the issue of demographics is a complex one. Frankly, we're seeing birth rates falling right across the Western world, but even within the United Kingdom, there are issues in terms of why Scotland is not attracting the proportion of people who are settling and making their home in the UK that other parts of the United Kingdom are being achieved.
As you're adding an extra hurdle. People will have to wait longer. They'll have to volunteer to prove their right to get permanent status in the UK.
Well, the right to remain, I think, is a reasonable and important step, but it's right to look at the timescales, and what Shabana Mahmood here at this Labour conference has set out are some clear reforms in striking contrast, I have to say, with what we've heard from Nigel Farage in Reform, who would seem on an arbitrary basis to saying to people who have come into this country legally, are contributing along with their neighbours to our economy and our society, that somehow they are going to be deported. I think that is wholly wrong, and the contrast with what Shabana is saying could not frankly be clearer.
Finally, you've run a lot of election campaigns in your time. You're going to help run next year's Scottish election campaign for Labour. What would you advise a candidate about whether to campaign with a party leader who is the most unpopular in the country?
So the first campaign that I was involved in relation to devolution was in 1999. We were behind the SNP when I and others got involved in that campaign. So I relish the coming contest, and I'm looking forward to working with not just Keir Starmer, but also Anas Sarwar. Keir Starmer himself is clear that there is going to be one person leading this campaign, and with respect, it's not Douglas Alexander, it's not even Jackie Bailey, it's not Keir Starmer, it's Anas Sarwar. I relish the prospect of STV hosting a debate between John Swinney and Anas Sarwar. We have better leaders, we have better policies, and I think a better prospectus for Scotland, and we're looking forward to the next 7 months.
Douglas Alexander, thank you.
Thank you.
And Paris, the Prime Minister addresses the party faithful tomorrow. What does he need to do in this speech?
Yeah, he needs to convince people inside and outside the conference hall that he is the man to turn things around, both for the party and for the country. For the country, that means he's got to conjure a vision that critics say has been lacking from his government so far, and crucially, convince people that they will be better off in a few years' time. We've been told that he's going to say the country stands at a fork in the road, a choice between decline and renewal. For the party, he's got to show that he can take the fight to reform, and we've been told he's going to talk about flags and patriotism and how he's not willing to surrender either the Union Jack or the Saltire to Labour's opponents.
Paris and Liverpool, thanks.